And welcome back once again, Wizards, to another episode of the Wizard Factory podcast, where you subscribe for weekly videos diving deeper into the universe and yourself. Today, we're going to be talking about what it means to own your magic and how you're a creator whether you like it or not. So, really, the bottom line of today's talk is going to be sovereignty, self ownership and responsibility that comes with that. So I'd like to start by a quote by Mr. Aleister Crowley. Why should you study and practice magic? Because you can't help doing it, and you'd better do it well than badly. So that really kind of sums up what we're getting into here today. And so, as usual, like to start with kind of defining some of our terms. We're the Wizard Factory. So, what is a wizard? A wizard simply means wise one. So, magic being the art and science of causing change in conformity with the will, a wizard means one who is wielding that magic with wisdom and intention. So, a wizard is one who is acknowledging the power that we have and really taking a responsible action with
hmm
that. So, Brian, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, so really getting into like the terms, because this is one of the goals with this episode is to not only, you know, pull people back to looking at their responsibility and the power that they really have, but kind of also explain some of a general theme or goal, of our mission here at the Wizard Factory. So obviously this word's incorporated into our name. So it, our whole goal with it is to teach people to help find and use wisdom. So we
Mhm.
also, if we have our little tagline, the empower, inspire, encourage that we did an episode about and how that relates to the trivium process and knowing that the third stage, the action of the trivium process, that's wisdom. So we're really, that's what we're about here is being able to teach people to start to understand how to use these process and then how to start acting, with that wisdom. That's really, one of the foundational goals and why we chose that word specifically. So I think a lot of people maybe have a lot of, you know, previous ideas about, when they hear that term, they immediately, will think of, some things that aren't necessarily accurate to what the word actually means when it simply just
Wisdom?
does nice one. Yeah, or your
Yeah,
wizard.
right. Both of those, I think
hmm
there's is just a lot of ambiguity in what people have ideas about in their own heads of just all
hmm
different kinds of things about them. So, yeah, very good point. So, as I mentioned before, the bottom line here is sovereignty. So, kind of revisiting this, anyone who is a regular listener of this show is no stranger to this term, and we will, continue to look at it as we kind of view it as one of the most important things that you can come to understand, but more importantly, take ownership and embrace or claim for yourself. So sovereignty, is sort of emotional and spiritual maturity. It's kind of like being a grown up. Like when you think about a child going through adolescence and teenagerhood and then becoming an adult, you know that responsibility is a big part of that. Of you're starting to do chores and then you're starting to earn allowance and you're starting to help do the dishes and things like that. Not to be a slave, but because you're contributing to these are things that need to be done. You're stepping up, you're manning up, and you're taking responsibility for helping um, around the house in that sort of way. And in that sort of way, sovereignty in a more general sense and in a sort of a spiritual sense, is taking ownership of what you're weaving into the web of weird, what you're actually creating by your choices in your day-to-day life. And taking it back to the trivium, that is a direct reflection of your mindset. It's the principle of mentalism. That which the state of your consciousness is what is will create the quality of what you're weaving into that web of weird.
hmm Yeah, and I think it's one of the main goals of this episode here is to make sure people can reflect on and realize that you're always a creator, that you're always creating
Mm,
something, whether you realize you are or not. So understanding, what you're creating and being able to direct your will and be in alignment with yourself when you do that, that really is the essence of magic. Or we could
mm,
even look at it in the sense of magic is really true intelligence in action. Because it's art and a science. So it's being
right.
able to have the science, the pattern recognition, and the art, the creative or the generative capability as well, and then to implement those together. And that's where really magic comes from. So we're always doing it. It's just what most people, they have a preconceived idea of what this term means, and they don't really realize that they're always doing magic. So recognizing that, keeping that in mind, and then learning how to consciously amplify that and direct it in a
Mm.
more conscious manner is really where that's the goal here.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, the word intelligence, and you can break that word down into intellect, which is the left brain, and gents, which is the creative force, which is coming from the right brain. So true intelligence isn't just being intellectual, it's dual hemisphere activated holistic intelligence. And that's, in as you just said yourself, magic is an art and a science. So it's the left and the
Mm-hmm.
right brain coming together. And being a creator is really kind of the most powerful thing that we know of. And so when you think about power, power is great potential, and power can be very dangerous. And so when I think about this, I kind of think of like a child waving a loaded gun around. It's scary because they don't really understand it. They don't really respect that power that they're holding, yet they still have the ability to do terrible things with it because they're not wielding it correctly. And I see our consciousness as exactly that. It can be extremely powerful for good or for creative or destructive purposes, depending on how that intention is being directed. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you can kind of, I guess we could get into, as I said, wielding with intention, or aligning, what we're creating with what our will is, our desired outcome. What do we will it to be? And so you can kind of look at the two forms of will, where one is that which is in alignment with the objective good, the objective, the creative, harmonious, the laws of nature, in terms of that which is creative, like like that spiral that we see in nature, and how like two frequencies harmonize and create, that is a scientifically observable goodness versus chaos and disorder and dissonance. And aligning that versus the egoic will, where if you're acting out of pure ego, as in wounded ego, that is only created by a state of experience of trauma or some kind of subconscious wounding. So therefore, when whatever you're creating out of that is coming from a place of fear and chaos, and not in alignment with that objective good. So it's usually sort of that self-serving, but at the expense of others, rather than the collective good and the harmony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely interesting to look at those different levels of kind of the will, whether and I like to would explain that higher will would be very much like your order log, that it's not
Mm,
only the will of source, but also you as an individuation of source and what
mm,
you chose to be your dharma and you chose to be your best. So bringing it back to that responsibility of this is also the will that you want to
your
experience,
higher
and
your
then
higher self
your
versus the
higher will.
lower self.
Yeah, and then it's about aligning the different levels of self. And I think it's also very interesting here to look at and understand that we have the different levels of the mind, which we've talked a lot about this before here. But there's we have our conscious mind, our subconscious, and our unconscious mind, looking at this from a psychological perspective. um, and then we've talked about before that it's our in the Helm of Awe, the world that is associated with, Svartalfheim is associated with the dwarfs, which the dwarfs are the creators of everything. All the magical objects that they create the weapons for the gods, and many other things.
Mm.
They are very much correlated to the realm that deals with our subconscious mind. It's our subconscious that we create from. So when we can recognize that we're not just necessarily one self or one being, that we have these different layers, we can start to approach things in a manner where we're incorporating all that knowledge and that understanding, and making sure that all the different levels of the mind, all the different selves are in alignment with each other.
Mm.
Because if, for example, like a great example, like where this wouldn't be happening and where a person wouldn't be able to manifest, they would be, kind of keep not really tapping into their magical ability, would be an addict who's saying
Mm.
that they want to quit, right? So the conscious mind is saying that, yeah, I want to quit, I want to stop doing this or whatever, but then they can't seem to do it. Well, that's because the subconscious and the unconscious, there's trauma there being played out that's more powerful than what the conscious mind is telling them. So those two are out of alignment. So then, they just seem like they can't control or direct their life where they want it to go. It's just slipping away from them, or, it's just there's this powerful force driving them that they don't understand. Well,
Mm.
keeping in mind that you have these different levels in the mind allows you to start to look at that and address it from that perspective. And then even beyond that, in the Norse tradition and many, animist, pagan traditions here, they don't just see a human being as just like one soul. You're actually seen as a community of beings, just like on in the physical reality field, our cells. There's individual cells, but then they make up a community that makes up you, and then that also then reflects in, each of us are individual human beings, but we all make up part of the human collective. So in this same essence, on the spiritual plane, through the law of correspondence, we actually see that, in the Norse tradition, you're made up of, an assortment of different beings, and those can be, paraphrased or summed up in a few different ways. But, just kind of interesting to see that they're addressing things from more of like a, holistic perspective, where you're including all the variables instead of trying to just oversimplify things, I
Mm.
think is really needed. So that way you're addressing things at all the different levels that need to be looked at.
Right, amazing points, and we can really see this playing out if for those who have been following us, we've done a couple episodes on this concept called the unconscious feedback loop, and this is ties right into that because it's those three minds, and because you're not transcending that subconscious trauma that's wielding your spindle, then you're getting caught in that what Brian came up with, this half life. Because if you look at Brian, you want to sort of point that
Yeah.
loop.
Yeah, so the unconscious feedback loop is based off of, and if you're not familiar with what we're talking about here, go back and check out those previous episodes. But in short here, it's a ghost door that goes between the realm of Helheim, which correlates with the unconscious mind, and Asgard, which correlates with our beliefs, and then that kind of feeds into this hamster wheel where people get stuck into dogmatic thinking. And what
Mm.
they're doing is they're cutting themselves off from access to the other worlds. But when we look at this symbol here, if we were to look at, the connection here, kind of like a road, right? And then you notice that you've got what, three worlds on this side and three worlds on that side, and this is kind of would be, you could, for lack of a better term, like the border in between. Well, this cycle kind of starts, and then you're keeping yourself kind of locked off. You're making this unconscious trauma is like building a fence that's cutting you off from the access to those other worlds, and those
Mm.
include, you know, the realm that deals with, other people. So having healthy relationships, being able to relate to other people, being able to tap into your ancestral guides, and have that ancient wisdom that you have access to, and that support that comes from them. And very importantly, in context to this episode, it cuts you off from the realm of the north, which represents unmanifested potential. So that
Mm.
ability to change, to tap into the imagination and pull something new from that to create. This is what magic is all about, is being able to create what you want. So pulling in, tapping into that realm of nothing, that unmanifested
The
potential, and then
possibilities,
the
right?
possibilities, and then pulling out everything and creating what you want from that. But
Mm.
when you're acting from an unconscious trauma, like I said, you're creating kind of this feedback loop that it cuts you off to like half of the worlds, in a short sense, just for to kind of get a I don't know. Something that dawned on me a little bit earlier, and I was like, yeah, it's kind of living a half life because you're
Mm.
not really accessing your fullest potential and having the healthy connections and relationships that you could not only with your ancestors but then with other people. So I thought
Ooh, and
kind of
check this out.
interestingly.
This actually just hit me too. If you're following that road or border, as you said before, which triggered me very much, but you're actually forming a semicircle. So you're not forming a complete circle. The circle is feminine, but you're
Right.
cutting it off with a line, which is masculine. So you're still stuck in that masculine left brain and cutting yourself off from completing that circuit into the feminine the realm of I Magic Nation and creativity and possibility, like new outcomes and things like that. So yeah, that's very interesting. And I mean, really, what we're getting at here with the theme of this, you're a creator whether you like it or not, is that by manifesting here, you have that responsibility, as we say, is the ability to respond, and not just in the sense of reaction, but also to respond to whatever situation is actually given. You can react to that, or you can make change to actually create a different situation to steer the 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 flow of the current moment, the present moment into a different direction. And even by not taking action, that is still a choice. That's why we're so strong on anarchy and the principles of freedom, is because you're sovereign whether you like it or not. Your free will is inherent to your very being. You can't delegate that to anyone else, even if you think you are. You've made the choice to do that, and you could still choose to undo that. Your will is like your desire. You can't want something you don't want, and you can't not want something you do want. Like it's just built into you, it's inherent to you. So there's absolutely no escaping this responsibility, no matter how much you bury your head in the sand or vote your rights away or whatever it is. It's always on you. That's why know thyself is so damn important, and it all comes back to you and wielding your power responsibly.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think it's also useful to look at here in the context of your orlog or your dharma. So you have like this mission that you've set for yourself to look in, and your will is very much deeply uh, tied with that. So I find it interesting that when you look at things from coming at them from the magical perspective, there's a big difference between in magic where you're manifesting through doing like sacrifice. I'm not talking about like sacrificing lives of animals or people or anything like that. I'm talking about being willing to sacrifice yourself in the sense that it could be you're willing to sacrifice the lack of understanding that you've had to come into a new understanding, or
Mm,
whatever it may be. But you're actually, the concept behind it is that you're putting an action out there in order to get a response, which is very different than from like prayer, which you're just begging something else outside of yourself to hope that it creates it and make it happen for you. So you're putting your responsibility as a creator outside of yourself
mm,
when you're doing something like that, or so that's where magic, it's bringing back that responsibility to be a creator. And if
mm,
you have this orlog, this soul desire that you want to achieve, the whole purpose of wielding your magic is to help you achieve that. So if you're not sacrificing for your dreams, you're sacrificing your dreams. It's kind of that what we were talking about earlier, where even inaction is an action. because you're constantly creating. There's no getting away from that responsibility. So sitting around and doing nothing is still going to create you a reality that you have to experience.
Mm,
And then the key is to bring it back to where you're going after what you really want, what you desire, that soul
mm.
desire, your orlog, your dharma. You're finding your mission and your purpose in this life, and then you're going after it and really trying to
Wow.
utilize and create as much as you can to achieve that.
Right. This is hitting me hard too. Is like, again, first of all, you chose to come here. It's all
Hmm.
about your free will choice. So when you choose to manifest, you are still uh, manifesting in the material with the metaphysical possession or property called free will. That is your property. That's yours. You own it. What you also get when you're born into the flesh vessel here in Midgard is your currencies, time and energy. Those are your actual currencies that you're, it's like when you start a game and you're like given this certain like starting money kind of thing. So like you're saying, Brian, if you're not sacrificing for your dreams, well, what would you sacrifice for your dream? Time, attention, and energy,
Hmm.
effort. Those are your
Right.
currencies that you can sacrifice or spending time and paying attention
Hmm.
on your dreams, then you're sacrificing your dreams. Because by
Right.
coming here, you have to spend. That's what the natural law, one of the natural laws, is all about. Energy does not stay put, it's always moving. And that gabo is always in effect where things are when you breathe in, you breathe out, you eat food, you eliminate it. Like everything is moving through systems like that of processing, because that's how everything is alchemical. Everything
Hmm.
is expanding towards more consciousness. So it's transmuting the lower into the higher at all given times. So yeah, man, that
Hmm.
that one goes really deep. I like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we've talked a lot about Magic Nation. That's that creative spark of like imagining the potential of what could be via the law of mentalism and subsequently correspondence. What we imagine, we then create. And that's where the law of attraction sometimes, we've talked about this, how it's sort of a half truth. You still have to take action, but in an indirect way, that which you are focusing most on is making an imprint on your psychology, and then you're actually taking action on that through your subconscious mind without even realizing it. So it still has to have action, but in that way, that's why things like affirmations and visualizations are still very powerful tools, because they are sort of leaving that imprint on your subconscious mind.
Hmm.
And then the next form of transfer from the mental realm, the metaphysical, into the physical, which is how we're creating, we're manifesting, is writing and speaking. So, spelling spells, like speaking something into existence is going from your mind into actually the physical world through speaking a vibration and words and writing symbols on paper. You're actually bringing it into the physical world in the first kind of way there. So,
Hmm.
we can look at like rituals. There's that word again, write is to create a right. So, by bringing something into manifestation, you're writing it and you're doing rituals, which is how we actually work with our subconscious mind. We can bring things to the surface, emotions that are being kind of buried, or unconscious aspects that are weaving into our webs inadvertently or unconsciously. And you can look at how this sort of aligns to right and wrong as well. So to write or do a ritual is creating that which is right. So that can mean right as in correct, but it's also a right action, in which is action is how we actually are creating. So you can see that parallel there of setting the intention through ritual or writing, and then taking right action upon it, and then therefore creating the subsequent outcome via the trivium process. So yeah, do you want to add anything to that one, Brian?
Yeah, really. I mean, like I said, I just think it's an interesting thing to observe that even people who aren't necessarily into the occult or the practice of magic consciously, they will say things like, for example, like when anarchists are kind of mocking the state, and they'll say, oh, you write something on a piece of paper and then all of a sudden it's magic and it becomes real. But
Ooh.
they don't consciously, understand what they're really saying is, in a sense, that yes, that is because you're taking words, which are a form of magic anyway, and then you're bringing them into the physical reality field. You're giving them a physical form. So you're it's starting, you're taking something from the mind, and then you're starting to bring it into this reality field. And that's why, things that are written down do have such a powerful effect on the psyche. I mean, even just, how many people, just because something's written in a book or written somewhere, will just automatically kind of believe it. There is a very interesting power to that
Mm.
I think affects the subconscious and the unconscious mind that many times people very much look over.
That's a great point. Yeah, just seeing something written in text, studies show that when, you know, like studies show that when you read something in writing, you'll believe things when it says studies show. It's
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
ironic. Yeah,
Right.
totally. And in like just recognizing the power of words, again, you've got spelling, you've got uh, I kind of like to say words are like S words or swords, like cutting through, by our willpower, sort of that needle of the spindle, and there's a whole sort of rabbit hole you could go down in all the spelling, the trickery with the words and things like that. But essentially, I mean, you can look at so many of the ancient sort of stories of the creation stories, and the universe was spoken or sung into existence by the creator. Even the word universe itself means one song. So via the law of vibration, everything is a sort of a song and a dance of move and flow and everything like that. And Brian, I believe you were mentioning something before about the Silmarillion, how that relates as well.
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar, the Silmarillion is one of Tolkien's other works that most people aren't familiar with. That it's kind of the prehistory of Middle Earth, leading up to before the time that took place, the Lord of the Rings took place. So in there, he has the creation story of how the Earth and everything came into being, and essentially it started with this one being known as Ilúvatar, which you could look at as source, creative source, and wanting to have an experience that then created other individuations of consciousness of itself, but that each had their own qualities, and these became the Ainur, or the gods. And then he gave each of them like a certain theme. There was a certain song, that each one of them was supposed to sing, as each of them had their own qualities. And then as they sung this, it actually brought the world into being. And there's another being, named Melkor, who tried to create discord within the song, and then he ends up becoming kind of the destructive force, out there. But it's
Involution.
right, exactly. But it's really just this same kind of general theme or essence of, using song to create, and that same also theme of, you know source energy then wanting to have experience, so it then has to split itself up into different individuations of consciousness that
Mm.
all have different qualities, different experiences. They sing a different song, and then all of their parts together then create, Midgard. They create the world. And so we see this in, so many different mythologies, and whether Tolkien was consciously doing this, or much more likely, subconsciously or unconsciously doing this, because these are archetypes, these are themes and understandings that are in our collective unconscious mind, that are then, I think, brought out many times through books and movies and other artwork like that, even though that artist doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily consciously fully doing that in every case.
Mm. Right. Yeah, it kind of makes me think of the shouts in Skyrim for all you gamer nerds out there like me. It's an ability that you unlock as the Dragonborn, as the main character of Skyrim. The dragons wielded power by their shouts, and you can learn these different shouts that actually have different powers. So you learn them by reading these runes carved in stone by the dragons that are like scratched, like dragon claw scratchings, and then you learn those words of power that form shouts, and then you can do stuff like these, sonic booms, or like move faster than, like speed time or something like that, so they built that even in, these video games. And definitely these that game for sure has a lot of Norse mythology kind of built into that. And this just hit me too, taking it back to weaving the web of weird. What is weaving? Like if you're weaving something, you're vibrating, like look at a weave, like going this way is like a wave, a frequency basically. So
Hmm.
like there's your song, you're singing your song by weaving into the web, because again, the web is, it's such a beautiful analogy because we're all co-creating. So we're all weaving into the fabric that is the one quilt or whatever it is that we're weaving. Like it's all one thing, that we all have a spindle and that we're all sort of weaving in, and it all weaves together.
Hmm. Yeah, no, like I said, I think it's interesting that even in, I'm not much of a gamer, but even in things like games, obviously, these kind of general themes of the power of sound, the power of vibration, the spoken word kind of comes through. And then, we see obviously reflected in books and mythology and movies. And so, very interesting thing
Mm,
I think, to observe and see
for
how
sure.
that comes through in its different manifestations. Um, so another thing here too that I think is a big issue people need to look at and then come to realize is that they're not victims. We talk a lot about getting out of the victimhood mindset and recognizing that you chose to come here to have an experience, that you are a magical being, that you are a creator, and that you were the one that is always creating your reality around you. And that's not to say, at the extreme of you are the only creator. Again, we're co-creating our realities, and all our actions and the responses from those actions, those all intertwine together, and that creates our experience that we all have. So when you can become aware, bring all your different selves into alignment, and then start trying to co-create in a conscious manner, where not only are you trying to elevate yourself but benefit others around you as well, like that gabo energy we've spoken about. That's when you really start to come into a place of being able to perform and master your magic that will actually start to have an effect, for the benefit of all, rather than just using, certain things for selfish purposes. So.
Right. And yeah, like that victimhood mindset is literally the antithesis to sovereignty. It's the,
Mhm.
oh, woe is me, I have no power, this everything's happening to me, and not owning that spindle. And and another thing that we hear a lot from people, especially in our Western society, which ironically is sort of Western brained, like the what is, I'm not very creative. And I personally think that that is not so much something that has to do with what their genetic, like you don't just inherit creative abilities. If there's some genetic connection, I think it more has to do with their natural tendencies towards a left brain mindset. So people who have, musicians that run in the family or something, I don't think that there's so much musicians as they're just more right brained, or they have musical parts of their brain that they have easier access to. And that's a good thing, because that's fixable. That's not something that's outside of your control. So playing back again to that victim mindset of, oh well, I'm just not very creative, or like people always joke like, well, all I can do is stick figures or whatever. I think that that's more to do with just they aren't accessing the parts of their brain that they actually have within them. Everybody has a whole brain. They just aren't accessing those parts of their brain. So it's not that you're not creative, it's that you're not accessing the creative aspects of yourself, which we can really blame a lot of that to do with our not only just everything, the trauma based mind control built into everything, the narcissistic control system, but starting young, and when you're dealing with the brain development, the school system is very left brain dominant, and more or less anti-right brain, anything that's, artistic or musical or anything like that. Those programs have been more and more minimized, I guess you could say.
What that brings up for me is, especially in a society that very much puts the intellect on a pedestal, that what a lot of times that can do is when people are creative, or they do have that ability, they might just be afraid to kind of tap into that or to express it for fear of being ridiculed by others,
Mm,
or something, kind of something like that. There's kind of
that's a
that
great point.
whole general maybe stigma about the that crazy musician or that crazy artist, where they just kind of lose their mind in their work,
Mm,
and that's kind of almost demonized in our Western society. So I
right.
think that could be a lot of interesting thing to look at. That many people, it's not that they're not creative; it's that they might just be afraid to express that creative ability for fear of ridicule.
Yeah, that's an excellent observation because your creativity is really something that is where your sense of individuality comes from, right? So when you're creative and you express yourself through clothing, you're going to dress like you. That's you coming out, that sort of right brain creative aspect, and that's going to make you stand out. And because of the herd mentality that we have in our society, that's frowned upon. Everybody should be uniform, literally uniform. And, anyone who stands out, the herd culls itself by ridiculing different, and bullying. And that's why a lot of the reason that I was targeted. I won't say why I was bullied because that's a victim mindset. I was targeted by bullies specifically because I was quite different, but then I allowed that to perpetuate because I didn't stand up for myself and put an end to that myself as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, very very interesting observation there.
Something I think to look at here is, we talked on it, we spoke about it just a little bit here, but looking at just art, what is art?
Mm,
Art is magic itself. It is, being able to create something and then bring it into, and that could be through a painting, through music, through, designing a beautiful building. There's so many different ways that this could come into. But going back to again that definition that we talked about, that keeping in mind magic is an art and a science, and I think a lot of people very much forget that. So I think that's also another reason that I think we can see in our school systems that any of the programs that are really dealing with create the music programs, the art programs, all these different things, uh, they are losing a lot of funding because they very much want to keep people locked into that left
mm,
brain kind of dominator mindset, where they're putting the intellect on a pedestal, because then you can keep people trapped in the maze of the intellect, and you're divorcing them from their care, which that feeling, which is also their generative power to be able to create change. Because if we start looking at things in creation, the feminine energy has to exist there first. Even when a little child is first born, there's a lot of feminine energy. There's all the nurturing that goes on from the mother, but then there's that receptive energy. So they're taking in the stimuli, they're drinking milk, they're you know, and if you look at a young child, they're all about what they're feeling in that moment. If they're happy, they're happy. If they're upset, they'll let you know they're upset. Like,
mm.
but it's just about that feeling in the moment. And then as we start to get older, then that masculine energy starts to develop. We start to be able to think a little bit more linearly. We, a little bit more logically, and we start gaining a little more of that. But that feminine energy has to be there first. It is that charge, it's that creative force, that generative force that has to be present in order to push anything forward. So by pushing people to where they're stuck in that left brain, and they're keeping them locked out of their access to that creative side, you make it to where they get stuck in this unconscious feedback loop that we talked about, because they're not able to tap into that potential to create
Right.
something in. So then they have to just
Yeah,
accept whatever's around them.
man, there's just so many different directions of depth, like with all this stuff. Like this is, I really enjoy all the nuances that can come out of this stuff. So when you were talking there about the feminine comes first, you're childlike first, and then you grow into maturity. But oftentimes that maturity comes into a different, it goes past that balance point into the other realm where, so
Mm-hmm.
children, if you say something like you're being childish, that's usually an insult, right? So we're not talking about, oh, you're so creative and childish,
Mm-hmm.
you're saying, oh, you're being petty, or you can't control your emotions. But then somebody who's older, who's mature, they've completely cut themselves off from their emotions, and they're and their creativity as well, and they're just like, gotta go to get a job, and this is just how it is, and things like that. So really interesting to kind of look at like the way we think of terms like childish and mature, and how both of those can kind of have that imbalance that comes with them. And also I
Mm-hmm.
was thinking about what you were talking about, what is art, and there's things that come to mind. First, obviously, music and painting and even dancing or something like that. But there's so many other things that are art that you don't normally think of so much as art. Like architecture is a great example,
Mm-hmm.
or cooking, or even marketing or something like that. There's to all of these, to even to any art, there is a science, really. So cooking, there's the infinite potential. What are all the ingredients? Where are all the spices? What are the colors that we can combine, and the different sauces and flavors and all these different things? But then there's also a mathematical aspect. There's measurements, and you don't want to put too much of something. Like, you've got to sort of measure things sort of more or less. Or music has unexpected, when the beat drops and it does something different you weren't expecting. But then there's still numbers and counting and sort of a structure that you have to follow, and there's wrong notes that you don't want to hit. You got to stay inside the scales and things like that. So really, any of that, like you said, architecture, that if architecture was simply functionality only and just the numbers and squares, it would be really boring. That
Mm-hmm.
feminine comes in, and there's all these different styles, and you can put these random curves that don't make any practical sense, but are beautiful, right? And like
Right.
you sent me some pictures the other day of this house that had this really cool curved
Yeah.
design to the roof, and the sun built into it. And that's really a perfect depiction of that synthesis between the masculine and feminine coming together to create just a building. It's one thing you've created that is embodying both of those energies really on full display. I just love that, and it's important to never lose sight of one of those either. But typically it's the feminine that gets lost or suppressed within us, because it's that individuality and that
Mm-hmm.
fun, playfulness, that sort of like almost chaotic, like, where'd that come from? I don't know what that is, but I like it. And you just kind of don't question it. You just kind of
Mm-hmm.
appreciate that flair.
Yeah, that was a straw bale house that is a good friend of mine, but it's been a project a few years in the work, but it's one of the things I like about it is that it is so kind of creative. Like they designed the roof to, like you said, have that wave in it, and then
Mm,
they cut like a blazing sun into the wood, where it's rising on the trim, and even with the different earth plaster that did on the outside, they did different colored earth plaster, so it's got like the multi texture. So it's really, and that it I find it interesting that it's a natural built house. So in nature we can observe this, that there's both these elements there, that yes, it has a structure, that rigid structure to it, but there's also a lot of that feminine playfulness there, and that
mm,
both of these are at play. And that's why magic is an art and a science. That's why intelligence is the masculine and the feminine. You
mm,
got to make sure that you're not just getting caught and trapped into only having one. You need to utilize both.
mm, absolutely. And back to that example of the building again, the building itself really is mostly masculine in terms of, it's a hard structure. It has, a certain shape to it, and all the measurements have to be right. And then just a little dash of that feminine. A little bit goes a long way, right? So we talked about the butterfly effect of sort of that feminine energy. It's kind of like the butterfly effect. It's very subtle, but yet so powerful that a flap of a wing can create a hurricane. And so, like, as you said before, the feminine comes first. So it's sort of that that energy, the emotion, energy and motion that gets things moving and therefore action. So, you can look at back to the trivium. In order to take an action, you have to care enough to do that. So the
Mm-hmm.
feminine is, you see the action as the sort of result, and that's where you can sort of see that materialist mindset of, well, you just see the action and then the action has an outcome, but they're not seeing behind the scenes of like what actually caused that action to first come into manifestation is that
Mm-hmm.
feminine that moved the masculine into taking action through care.
Right. Yeah, it's the that ability to tap into the creative mind, the imagination. Because for example, look, my buddy's house, he first had to come up, he had to come up with the creative idea. He had that thought, that inspiration, and then he had to figure out how to do it, take action, how to do it, and it's really, excellent example. And that's again
Mm-hmm.
ties in perfectly with what we mean that everything is a magical act. I told him that why I was up there is that,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, man, this is quite the magical act here. Even in the house, it was built together, mixing use of all the other different elements. Used earth, plaster, and water and lime. I mean, there's, go, you know, goes on and on. So you know, looking at every single thing you do, if you can start to look at it as a magical act, learning that everything can be a ritual, and
Mm-hmm.
then start stepping into that power, realize that, like, oh, now my actions, they really do have a lot more of a powerful effect than what I'm thinking, and I can learn to consciously amplify that effect to where you become more and more effective at creating that change that your will is wanting to achieve.
Absolutely. So I think we can look in conclusion here. We are the wizard factory. So it's important that people understand what is our actual objective, what is our mission, and that is to share knowledge that you can take, but also tearing away and destroying mindsets that are stopping you from integrating your fullest potential and really owning your power. So we're not really out to attack individuals. We are more questioning and challenging belief systems and mindsets that are disempowering. So the victim mindset, or the status, the belief in government, or the monotheistic, Abrahamic mindsets. These are all inherently anti-sovereignty. So we're not attacking Christians. We're not attacking statists any more than a medicine is attacking the cells of the body. We're attacking the cancer, and the cells get confused and think that they are the disease. We're trying to get rid of disease and purify that which is natural. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your brain. It's the beliefs that you've potentially taken in and identified with. So by identifying with a belief that is not true, you feel that we're attacking you because we're attacking the belief that you think is you. So that's where people get triggered out and they feel personally attacked, and then they dig in even harder, and they're unable to process that information because it's challenging their sense of actual identity of who they think they are. So
Right.
yeah, you got
Yeah.
anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, what that really brings up is that it comes down to like critical thinking. So for example, if there was uh, a situation between different people, you can remove the names and then kind of look at, well, would it be okay for this person to do, like, looking down to just what is right action or not. But if we can bring this on, this same kind of scale of judgment into looking at belief systems, you got to take it down to the foundational aspects of that belief system, of that mindset, bringing back to the principle mentalism. So where we can look at the fundamental mindset behind statism and see that it is inherently wrong, it's anti-sovereignty. So you need to take the same scale and apply it to any belief system. So does this belief system, is it based on sovereignty? Is it based on empowering a human being? Or are there foundational aspects of this belief system that are inherently disempowering and that always put people's power and responsibility outside of themselves? Because if that is the case, those belief systems need to be looked at and disregarded. They need to be questioned and torn apart so people can work through that, because those poison mindsets are what are allowing the society that we have going on, because they're creating that unconscious trauma. So if we want to heal that, these things have to be looked at. So it's not a matter of attacking any religion or any specific thing. It's looking at them honestly, questioning them, and then recognizing whether or not these are against sovereignty and freedom, or whether these are disempowering people or they're empowering them, and then being honest with what we find. And that includes looking at our own belief system. That's why a lot of times when we talk back and forth, we'll compare, like, for example, a Christian mindset, but then we'll also flip around and turn it and explain it from the animist or the pagan mindset, and then
Mm-hmm.
compare whether or not, like, do these line up? Are these about empowering people and letting them have them free will, or is it about having them conform, and then if
Right.
they don't conform, punishing them? So that's why, teaching people what their magic really is, that they have this much power, is what we're all about. So that's why we're focused on finding the mindsets that are empowered and destroying the ones that are disempowering.
Right. Exactly. And you this concept of cherry picking, that people of dogmatic persuasions are known for, is really a symptom of cognitive dissonance. Is they're off every time you put pressure, because when we make statements about things like Christianity or statism, we're not just really making these broad, just general statements. We make very specific points about what their beliefs actually are and why they're disempowering. So you have to cherry pick in order to for it to even make sense in your own mind. So the people who are anti-war, but then they say, but the roads and the education. So they're cherry picking. Well, government does some good things, and then there's some good scriptures in my book, but then they ignore the ones that are disempowering, or they try to make some sort of weird rationalization about, well, historical context makes somehow slavery okay or whatever. Like, it's absolute nonsense. So that's, like, that really sums it up, really, is that we're sharing empowering knowledge, but we're also trying to shed light on disempowering mindsets that people that are very common in our world, and just encouraging people. We're not knocking the poison cup out of your hands, but we're telling you, hey, there's poison in there. So I like to liken it unto spreading knowledge about nutrition. If you want to eat garbage food, that's your right to do. And I don't have the right to go up and knock the cheeseburger out of your hand. But at the same time, I do have the right to say, you know how many chemicals is in that? And you know how sick you're going to be in 50 years after eating that? And I have an obligation to do that because I actually care. It's an act of care to try to spread truth, to empower others through, and that's what we're really all about. We're not against stuff. We're pro empowerment in all
Mm,
the forms that takes. So yeah, I
right.
think that pretty much wraps it up. So, talking a lot about actions here. If one action that I can suggest you make is to click the like button below and help our channel grow and spread the word. And that's going to wrap us up here today. So, real quick housekeeping. I want to announce officially that we have launched our website, thewizardfactory.com. Go check it out. It's got everything that we're offering. It's got all the podcast episodes and our Arts of Gnosis consultations. Got a T-shirt up there if you want to buy a Wizard Factory T-shirt.
Mm,
And a donations page. So if you feel called to help support us through voluntary means and financial means, send us any little amount is helpful to us, because we don't want to always be stuck in the matrix. Like, the more that we become financially independent ourselves, the more that we can do the work that we really feel called to do, and that is ending slavery and empowering the individuals, and remembering the human tribe. So yeah, go check out the website, see what you think. Feel free to email us if you have any suggestions or feedback, or any bugs that you encounter or anything like that. And Brian, if you have anything you'd like to add.
no, I think that sums up. Yeah, just check out the website. It looks really great. You did an excellent job working on it. So,
Oh, well, thank
encourage
you.
everybody to go check out that. Which you can always find access to all our other social media through the website as well. So
Right. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Just a one-stop shop to get all our information. So
yeah, make sure you follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And that's going to conclude this week's episode. So join us again next week, please. Don't forget to subscribe. And until then, be empowered, inspired, and encouraged.